Hello, welcome back to Legislative Digest, the Capital City Edition. This is our third episode in a four-part series. I want to welcome our local area legislators back to this table, and we'll do a quick round of self-introductions again because this might be the first time some people see the program. So, to my left, Representative.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and your wonderful crew. My name is Representative Mary Ann Dunwell. I represent House District 84, which is Helena and East Helena. And today is day 60 at the 66th session of the legislature. So we're 2/3 of the way through. And I'm happy to be serving everyone.
And this is when things get interesting. We're going to find out how interesting it is momentarily.
Interesting is one word you could use.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue.
My name is Julie Dooling. I represent House District 70, which is the northeast corner of Lewis and Clark County and Broadwater County.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Sorry I haven't made it yet. Rob Farris-Olsen from House District 79, which is the west side of Helena, all the way out to the Divide. And I sit on Judiciary, Natural Resources, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Yeah. Well, glad you're here. We have two freshmen here today and two seniors, so to speak. Not senior citizens, senior legislators. Sorry. Let's keep going.
I am, and I'm proud of it.
I'm thinking high school, not.
And I am Senator Joe Cohenauer from Senate District 42, which is also East Helena and the Helena area, all the way past the Capitol. And of course, I serve on tax and fish, wildlife, and parks and natural resources.
Okay, well, we're going to start today with some general discussion and then kind of gravitate to specific bills that each of you are sponsoring or carrying or fighting against, for all I know. But my first question has to do just with the general tone of the session at this juncture. You know, you said we're 2/3 of the way through. That suggests there's pressure, time pressure building, because there's a lot of bills, important bills that have yet to be heard or yet to be decided upon. But as a viewer, occasional viewer of the House, it seems like the tone there is fairly civil and convivial. We notice humor when it happens, which is always nice. But correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you folks are in the House. What's it like right now in that chamber? Besides people falling ill from time to time and all that, I know there's germs, but what else? What's it like?
I don't have a point of reference, being it's my first session. You can tell pressure is ramping. People are getting a little bit more agitated when things aren't going smooth. But all in all, I still feel like it's going fairly well. We may fall apart a little bit, but we're coming back together and moving forward.
Yeah, maybe I haven't seen it, but I haven't noticed rules challenges, the typical kind of scuffle that will happen when things are out of joint. I don't know if that's happening much at all. Either on the floor or behind the scenes.
There are two political parties at the legislature, Republican and Democrat, and I'm a Democrat, and I am in the minority because there are fewer of us, and it's not going so well for us. I kind of think of the golden rule, them's that got the gold make the rules, but no offense. I mean, all in all, it's politics.
Yeah.
I wish we could do this without politics and just look at the public policy, but sadly, that's why they call it politics. In many cases, we're passing some good policy. Don't get me wrong there. But frankly, some of the really big ticket items are immersed in politics, and I'm just going to leave it there. I can tell you, though, that we have to be cognizant of including the public. I sit on the House Taxation Committee. It's my third term on that committee. So I've seen a thing or two, and this is the time where we get lots of bills and we have the same amount of time for hearings. And sadly, the chair actually told me that we have so many tax bills next week that each hearing will go no longer than 20 minutes. Now, that's very unfortunate, especially, not just for folks in Helena, but folks who travel a ways
Right.
to engage in their government, which people have a right to do, and we all encourage it. So there's that. Something gives.
Very limited testimony.
Yeah.
2 minutes, maybe one, maybe none.
Or say your name, and that's, having said that, though, I'm also on legislative administration, and we've seen a couple of bills, and we've passed them through the House. Well, one was today on second reading, and it passed, so it'll be on third, probably Monday, to take a look at the structure of the legislature and the legislative session. Are we really doing justice to making the policy of Montana by having session every 2 years and trying to squeeze so much into 90 days and maybe even fewer days? We have more bills introduced now. I want to say close to 1,000 introduced, not counting the ones that were written and
On hold.
requested.
Yeah.
On hold, exactly. So the saving grace is that hopefully these bills will get through, and during the interim, we will take a look and study, and make some recommendations to improve the process. And with that,
Well,
I'm
that's
gonna be done.
a perennial matter of studying the structure of the legislature and considering annual sessions. It's been going on for quite some time. But I gather from what you're saying that the pressure is being felt enough within the body to generate a little more interest in actually carrying that through. We'll see. Let's keep going around the table before we get to specific issues and bills. The first question, Mafi Funk, welcome.
Yeah, glad you could show up.
It's about time.
It's harder to get out of the Capitol than you think sometimes.
Right, and we both had floor
closest.
this morning, so.
I know.
Well, we've been making fun of you, but now that you're here, we'll stop.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah. So we're just talking about the general tone of the session at this juncture in time, 2/3 of the way through. How are things from your vantage point?
Well, I would agree this week was, you felt the minority status perhaps a little bit more than other weeks, but some good things were done. Kudos to Julie for getting the pay plan signed, and that's historic this early. I mean, I know it doesn't seem that early in the session, but yeah, that's particularly for the people here in Helena. Thank you so much for your leadership on that. So I'm trying to focus on those things that are, and I think that despite the fact that we are feeling our minority status because of the budget discussions and things, there still is a high degree of collegiality within the body. I was just talking about it actually with somebody this morning from across the aisle, and I turned around and our speaker and minority leader were high-fiving each other. I think it had something to do with activities last night, but I'm not sure. But still, I mean, there is, I think their relationship is very strong, and they're working to make our voices heard and understanding when we need to make our voices heard. So I still feel very positive about infrastructure and Medicaid expansion, and those are our two big heavy lifts.
And we'll talk about those shortly. Rob?
Sure. So I like Julie, I don't have much experience with this session, but from my perspective, there's more collegiality than most people see. For example, last night we stayed late for executive action in both natural resources and judiciary to pass out committee bills, essentially. For natural resources, it was aquatic invasive species, where Representative Curdy introduced one bill that had fees on hydro, one that didn't. And so as a committee, we kind of came together with Senate Natural Resources and crafted a bill that at least everyone on the House side could get behind. And we passed that out last night at 5:30 or 6, and it was a lot of the input was actually from the chair, who's a Republican, on a Democrat bill. And so it was great to see that collegiality come together to fund aquatic invasive species prevention, which is critical in this state. And then at the same time, we've seen a number of bills, including one from Representative Dunwell, on extending statutes of limitation for sexual assault crimes, sexual intercourse without consent, and they were varying lengths of time. Well, those I think 4 or 5 bills were crafted into one committee bill that Representative Morajo sponsored that extends the statute of limitations for civil and criminal claims in different ways. But in crafting that bill, Representative Morajo worked with the Republican side and came up with a bill that, again, everyone is happy with. And I know the Speaker also made it a priority to get something put together. And so, from my perspective, seeing two somewhat polarized committees come together to create those 2 bills was incredible.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, though those issues are less prone to the politics that you mentioned earlier. In other words, there's not deep philosophical division on aquatic invasive species and what they can do to our economy. So there's always going to be areas or arenas where things come together quite naturally. You know, people respect the land and want to preserve it. So we have one distinguished senator with us. Can you compare and contrast what you've heard about the House and what's it like in the Senate?
So we are the wisdom of the legislature. And, you know, there has been a study, actually, that the amount of time that people have been in the legislature in the House is about 2.5 sessions, and in the Senate it's about 7.5 sessions. So we tend to have a more smooth time anyway, just because of that. There's a long-term relationships between people of both parties. There's, you know, we've known each other a very long time in most cases, have served in the House together before moving to the Senate. So it's usually a lot smoother no matter what happens, because even when things get upsetting and all of that, we tend not to go over the top and stuff like that. It's a lot more fun that way in the House, let me put it that way. But in the Senate, we're doing the same kind of thing. There's been a lot of work together on a lot of things. One of the things I've noticed is that policy that has been brought over and over by Democrats has actually been brought by Republicans this time and is tending to pass the session. To me, that's a little disappointing just from the standpoint of it was good policy all along, and now it's getting passed by the folks in the majority. And for us, good policy is good policy, so we all vote for it and want it to pass. We like that working together. I just filled out a little thing, I think, for the Helena Chamber, just a little informational piece, and that was my deal. What is the best thing about serving in the legislature? For me, it's when you get a bill like that, where it's everybody working together to make incredible policy for the whole state of Montana. So,
Do you want to tell us what that is, that policy?
I had been thinking back to some really amazing policy that I had worked on with at the time, I think we were in the House, was Representative Chaz Vincent from up in the Libby area, and we had done some really good work on the logging stuff in the state of Montana, the Plum Creek, the Weyerhaeuser property that's out here that is now essentially being managed, although by a private corporation, but it's being managed as public land. And it just kind of brought it to my attention one more time that, boy, when you do things, it's like legacy things that last for years and years. So it's pretty amazing.
So being a legislator is consequential.
Oh, yes, very.
And, you know,
very.
we know there's a lot of fix-it bills and, you know, code cleanup and all that, but the substantive things do make a difference in people's lives. So let's talk about the big ticket items that have yet to be resolved. The budget, and you can pick and choose which you want to start with, or we can dwell on first. The budget, Medicaid expansion, infrastructure, bonding,
Historical
those things.
Society.
And the Historical Society. We are here in Helena, and we know the Historical Society is about the whole state. It's not just about Helena, but we can't not talk about it because it's...
Yes.
Well, let's start there because that hearing is upon us, I believe.
It's on Monday
a
morning at
and
9
we're
o'clock.
here on a Saturday.
Yep.
So who wants to start talking about that?
Well, and I'll talk about it just because I've been working with Senator Gauthier about getting that bill together. This is another one of those bills that I think finally is getting some traction. We've brought it time and time and time again in different iterations. This one's really similar to the last one that was brought in the last session. A little bit different distribution of some of the funds, more grants that are going to go out on the ground to further places in Montana, to some of the smaller historical societies and museums across our state, which I think will be super helpful. It's going to take 5 years, essentially, of the money from an increase in the accommodations and bed tax in order to build the building here in town. But those grants will be available, about $2.5 million will be available across the whole state for all of those other museums to either increase their ability to house things, which means infrastructure and security and all of those kinds of things, so that the Historical Society here in Helena can actually send collections out across the state of Montana, which they do currently. But a lot of places don't have the security and the environment in order to keep them safe. And so we want that to happen. So that's a part of it. There's increases that will then flow to tourism across the state to increase the people who come here, because our historical museum is actually a destination place for a lot of people that come to our state. But when they come here, they tend to stop in other places, right? Spend money in the state of Montana and really increase our ability to keep those tourism dollars within the state of Montana. So the bill itself, I think, constructed the way it is right now, is on target with what we need it to be. I think there's a will in this session from both parties to get this done. We've been battling about it for so long. I think that there is a group of people that really want to find the solution for that this time around, and I'm very excited about the fact that we're going to get there this time.
So the first hearing is in the Senate,
Right.
a Senate committee,
Yeah.
and let's just presume that it survives that process and it survives the Senate floor. Then it moves across to the House. And Julie, you're representing the majority party here, and historically, the Historic Heritage Center, the Historical Society, has been hostage to the bonding provisions in the bonding bill, and it's been removed from that. So it only takes a majority vote now to pass or deny passage. We've had a discussion here with Senator Gauthier, and I'd like to think of it as a joint venture.
Yes.
You know, it's a joint venture you're co-sponsoring. But we kind of danced around the issue of the funding. I mean, it does require a tax increase. And do you want to just speak your mind now about what you anticipate will happen when that bill reaches the House?
Not to put you on the spot.
And, you know, I'm asking you to speculate, so, you know.
And that's, I mean, it's kind of a hard position, because representing a chunk of Helena and the Broadwater County, we're close to it, so it affects us. It's a good place to send the schools to for field trips. So it is a resource that we need to take care of. As far as the rest of the Republican Party, I'm just not sure where they all sit on it. But I do like the fact that it has been taken out of the bonding issues, and it's on its own. They've found a solution that's a workable solution that, Montanans will pay for, because we spend a lot of nights in our own hotels here across Montana, but the tourists will help pay for it as well. Yeah. So I think it's a good compromise. It's a good idea. I just hope it has a lot of traction in the House. I'd like to see it go through.
Yeah. Well, as a citizen who lives in Helena and has been hearing about this for eons, it seems like, I can say without any reservation that I hope it passes too. I mean, it would be a wonderful thing.
It's hugely important to this community, but it's really hard to get a representative who is on, the North Dakota border to have placed that much importance on it as well, because they have issues within their own community.
Yeah.
So it's
That might be the genius of adding these grants that go
right,
out
right.
to the rural areas.
And that will be stimulus for those communities, for those museums. And it brings more people to the table, more interest to the table. So I think that was a really great plan when they structured that.
Yeah.
Because those little museums, I mean, when you go to a little town and they have the 3 rooms, they are so much fun.
They are.
They really are. And to be able to help them, I think it's probably maintenance is one of the primary, because as Jill said, to get them where they could show and keep some of the more sensitive documents and artifacts that we have might be a bit, but just to help them tell the story of their communities, because everyone is very unique here. So yeah, I think that is not only smart politically, but really smart for the history of our state.
Yeah. We've made a tour of rural museums in years past and televised that. But it's amazing what you learn about the history of a particular place and the particular people. It is incredible. Well, we can continue to talk about this, or we can move on. You have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say, it will be historic when it passes, but I would like to weigh in from the tax committee perspective and what taxation is. It's public revenue to spend on public amenities, like the Historical Society, like snowplows. And we, the House Tax Committee, will be voting on the revenue estimate upon which the budget, the HB2 is based, and both the Legislative Fiscal Division and the Office of Budget and Program Planning and the Executive Branch, Governor Bullock's branch, so both those two branches recommend lowering the revenue estimate that currently is in HJ2. Legislative Fiscal Division recommends $37 million lowered, and the executive recommends lowering it 61 million. Now, that's in order to say, this is the pot of money we have to operate public programs, your government, and to be good government, and we need to come up with as accurate as possible of a revenue estimate. And so we'll be working on that. Probably what we'll end up with is somewhere in between, maybe lowering it 40 or 50 million. And that's the give and take, the politics of it all. But I would just like people to keep in mind that this is what we all pay. It's shared public revenue that we all pay to benefit from, roads, parks, clean water, snowplows, firefighters, police, and yes, Historical Society. Nobody likes paying taxes, right? Nobody likes paying taxes. But I think everybody wants a fair, equitable tax system. And our tax committee we have a bill to take a look at, not at the entire tax system. I believe we should do that, and it should be an independent task force that is set up. Try to take as much of the politics out of it.
Yeah.
But we do have a bill, and it's a committee bill, to take a look at tax credits and a process to review tax credits. And so we're working on that. But, we need to, next week we're calling it Revenue Generating Week, because we have a number of bills that would, tap an opportunity to generate some of this public revenue. And I have a whole long list here, and keep in mind, they're going to be 20-minute hearings, sadly, and they are wonky. They are tax bills. I mean, I've got one on something called intangible personal property.
Yeah.
Oh, first of all, what's personal property? Well, it's sort of like, it's like business equipment. But some of these, what we call centrally assessed corporations, big companies that are like pipelines. They cross county lines, telecommunications, pipelines, railroads, transmission lines. They get an exemption when the Department of Revenue is appraising their property. They get an exemption for this intrinsic value. It's wonky, it's called goodwill. But anyway, I'm going to try to make it really simple. It's sort of like, we as, if you own a home, you own your house, you don't get this kind of exemption. It would be like if you owned a home and you would get valuation exemption or tax exemption on any built-up equity in your home. Well, that's what these centrally assessed companies are getting, and it just doesn't make sense. So I call this property tax reform. We also have some income tax reform, fairness and simplification income tax bills, a couple of those. So I'm not going to go through all of them,
Yeah.
but if somebody wants to come to the Capitol concerned about some of the cuts in social services and human services that still have not been restored in our budget, which is one of the reasons, well, it's certainly the reason I voted against I voted against the budget bill because it's not enough.
Yeah.
But if somebody wants to have their voices heard in 20-minute hearings, please do, because we need this money for some of these important
So you want to be
human
first in line.
services.
If
You
you're
want-
going to testify, try to be
Yeah.
first in line, because you
Yeah.
won't have much time. Well, let's segue to the budget, but let's start with something you mentioned that was news to me, and that is that the revenue estimate is, I don't know, substantially lower, or, you know.
It's not, actually.
It's higher, so that's the thing.
$50 million sounds like
it's-
a lot, but it's not in the terms of.
But it's
It's
not.
like
When you're talking-
0.5% of the general fund
And when
in
you're
the
talking
state
about
of
a
Montana.
Yeah.
10
so
point
it's
some
not.
billion dollar budget.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, right, I mean, we have a
Very
lot
small
of public
amount.
revenues, but the revenue estimate sort of, it's fluid, I mean, it's an estimate.
Yeah.
Because things continually change, income tax collections, corporate tax collections and whatnot, but, so it's an estimate, but we want to be as accurate as possible so we don't just guess. We made a mistake last session and overestimated the revenue estimate. So we said we had so much money when actually we had this much money. And what ended up happening? It forced the governor to comply with the mandate that we have to have a balanced budget. And he had to make cuts on human services.
Yeah.
And that's, that goes back to, hey, let's avoid all that. Let's take a look at our public revenue system. We should
Right,
be proud of it.
I think there is a broad appreciation for the need for a reformed tax system because the economy has changed so dramatically in several decades.
Yes.
So, and I know we're not going to get into that here and now, and it's going to take some time, but my sense is that it's a bipartisan understanding that modernization of the tax system is in order, needs some technical expertise to figure that out. So let's just move on to the budget. House Bill 2 has left the House and it's in the Senate. And what would any of you like to say about the condition of House Bill 2? And Mary Ann, you've already touched on that, but what would you like to say about it now? It is the big spending measure. It's the #1 bill of the legislature. People know that, but it's not done yet. What are your expectations?
Sure.
I'm looking at you, Rob.
Since you're looking at me. Again, this is the first time I've gone through this process. I think what we ultimately passed through is good. It just could be better. I don't know how many folks watched the hearing on the floor, but our side came up with a number of amendments, including adequately funding the public defender system, which was my amendment. So certainly it's good, but it could be better from my perspective because there are some small things we could do. Like I think my amendment only increased public defender budget by $2.5 million over the biennium. But when you do things like that, at least in that system, it increases efficiency for the courts and for the public defenders and for the prosecutors. So while the fiscal note's $2.5 million, it may save some funds in the long run by getting people through the process and getting adequate representation and ensuring that the public defenders don't come back next session with, I think, a $5 million supplemental for the contract workers. Their supplemental was $7 million this year. So we know they're going to come back with another supplemental. It's just how big is it going to be?
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it could be better. And there were a number of other amendments the Democrats brought that would have created efficiencies like that or more adequately represented what we felt needed to be funded.
Yeah.
And I have a huge concern about the cuts that are coming from DPHHS that are still in place. I mean, we, during that interim, during the special session, made some pretty harsh cuts that got permanently put into the base budget, essentially, of DPHHS. And it's things that we would all say are things that we need to continue to fund. It's mental health services. It's, care for children with disabilities, and those things were hardwired into their budget. A lot of that didn't get fixed, and I know that it was in the newspaper just this last week, basically discussing the fact that another 120 positions have been gone unfilled. What people don't understand, because that's my department, is that those unfilled positions were due to the requirement to make the cuts that we made in the special session.
Yeah.
So when we come into this session and the legislature looks at those positions and said, well, they were unfilled. Well, now is the time when we're supposed to be allowing them to fill them so they can provide those services. And those are real people in real communities across the state of Montana that were affected by that. And yes, those were unfilled positions, but it was because we didn't have the money from the special session in order to actually fill the positions. So them being open for a period of time was because of legislature, because of what we did.
So the demand for these services is not going
Never
down.
went away.
No.
It's just the supply
And so
of finance.
now you have the people who are currently still trying to do that work in the department that are doing the work of 2 and 3 employees, just trying to maintain being told by the legislature that this is going to be what it permanently looks like for you. I have to tell you, there's a lot of people who are getting out of state government because they can't handle that. It has been an ongoing thing to underfund the provision of resources to actually provide quality services to the people in Montana. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that government is bad, government is bad. Well, we as legislators are what make it bad in some cases, and we need to be very cognizant about the needs of the people in our communities across the state of Montana. We just are not doing that. This is not a number on a piece of paper. These are real people. Real people doing jobs and real people who need resources in order to be successful in
And
our
I'd like
communities.
to piggyback on that. I am a former employee of the Department of Revenue, and I retired from my day job last summer, but I can tell you, we had to close down 28 of our 56 local offices that people in communities, local communities, depend on to get important information, revenue information. And we heard from the county commissioners, why are you closing these down? Well, how are we going to fund them if we don't have the money? How are we going to pay? Again, it goes back to we need public revenue to pay for public services. I just want, I'll allow somebody else to comment on the budget. I just want to end with, like former Vice President Joe Biden said, show me your budget and I'll show you your values, and that'll tell me your values.
Yeah,
So our
that's
budget reflects our values.
That's a classic formula, and it's good to be reminded of it. It's so basic.
I'm working behind the scenes trying to get more money for suicide prevention. I mean, that's kind of my thing. Everybody has a white whale they're chasing. And it shouldn't be that, but especially because we are number 1 in the country in suicide, from youth to veterans to seniors, and everybody in between.
So what are the
There's no demographic left untouched. Reservations, and we are 4 times the national rate for youth suicide. And we woefully underfund suicide prevention. And
So what are the prospects that the Senate will put more money in than the House did?
Well, and I think it's a possibility because that's the process on the appropriations bill. It's set up to basically kind of be fluid between the 2 houses. In fact, they start at the beginning of the session meeting together in joint appropriations so that they can talk about how things go, and that process continues through. So when it comes to us, it left the House. We're getting more information about the revenue estimate, which is, we're essentially guessing on revenue for 3 years. We don't even know what we have for this year, let alone 2 years from now as we move through a process. So that helps us, as we move those numbers around to kind of know where we need to be as we move through, so that the Senate actually does put a mark on this. They work on the bills that have come from the House and things that are headed to the Senate, and as those are passing and the policy is passing, then those get taken into consideration in the budget bill as we go through. And as we get towards the end, those budget committees are going to be meeting and finishing up. It'll be a lot of deal making to figure out how we're going to get out of the session. That is our one job as a legislature.
The budget.
Our one job is to
I
get
thought
the
you were going
budget
to say
for the
the one
state.
job is to get out of it.
No, the one job we have as a constitutional mandate is a budget for the state of Montana, and we got to do that.
Yeah.
It is, and we got to do it together. And that is one thing that, that is a very good thing that we all work together on, because it is the one thing we have to do.
Well, let's move, unless somebody wants to add to this, you're welcome to, but we could move to just a big budget item that has yet to be decided. It's been debated. I think you had a full day hearing on 2 bills on a Saturday on the Medicaid expansion. There's 2 competing bills, one on the Republican side, one on the Democrat side. Neither of the sponsors are here with us today, but you are all licensed to speak your minds about the condition of those bills, what distinguishes one from the other. So who would like to launch into Medicaid expansion?
Well, I'm
Oh,
on the Human
Mafi's ready.
Services Committee. Well, can I just say, okay, go ahead, Mafi, but I was part of the day-long hearing on Medicaid expansion, both for Representative Mary Cafero's very good bill, 425, and Representative Ed Buttry's bill, 658. And I need to tell you, Mary had planned to be here today, but something came up, probably something
Related
to
to this
do with
bill.
I'll tell you
Medicaid
what,
expansion.
she has all those munchkins, and she needed to.
Okay.
She had parental duty.
She had her real life to deal
She
with.
had real life to deal with, but she certainly has been working.
She's
Okay,
been
so,
working hard.
and I support 425 because it's shown over and over again how Medicaid expansion that we passed in 2015 with the HELP Act is very good for the economy, very good for the health of Montana, and it would be a tragedy to take it away, or even try to tinker with it, and frankly, the proposal in 658 throws some people off the program, and I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with saying, okay, I mean, we heard a couple comments from some of our colleagues in the legislature during the hearing, we need to decide who's deserving and not. And so I asked a mom, I said, your daughter's cancer was caught because she was able to get health insurance. She might have not have been able to get health insurance, and she works 3 jobs. How would you tell her, sorry, you're not deserving?
Yeah. Well,
so-
let's talk a little bit about the tinkering that you're alluding to. Mary Cafero's bill pretty much leaves the program as it was conceived 2 sessions ago intact, just extends it into the future on a permanent basis.
By Ed Buttry, who passed that bill.
Yeah,
So-
and with I know there's some changes for voluntary workforce training or something like that. So it's not exactly the same bill, but it's pretty much the same program going forward. The competitive bill, which is also from Senator Buttry, has some additional requirements. So who would like to characterize the difference? What is it about the current
think
program that needs fixing?
Well, I know from our constituents, we've heard that they don't like the free-for-all program. They would like to see the sideboards on it. They would like to see the work requirements, asset testing, and the other things that have been set up. And, we have to answer to everyone in Montana, not just the people who agree with what's currently in place. So this is the other option. And we'll just have to see what happens, because you've got the 2 bills, and we'll see what happens with the committee, with those 2 bills in committee.
Yeah. No, the fiscal note on this bill was just released, I think, last night. So it's nobody's really familiar with it yet. But we know that the Republican version of Medicaid expansion has costs associated with it that are new and different. Additional costs for monitoring, for policing the system. That's probably too harsh a term, but keeping track of who is deserving and who isn't, who's gaming the system and who isn't, who's fulfilling the requirements. So let's just talk a little bit in general terms, not about specific numbers, but about how do you compare the cost of Medicaid expansion as it is versus Medicaid expansion with the sideboards? I know we've addressed this a little bit before, but you know more now. And
Well, and I would just say that if we're going to add government positions, they should be restoring some of them at DPHHS, not creating new positions to monitor this program that has shown itself very effective. There is, I mean, I don't have the figures, but people are not abusing the system at all. They are working. The vast majority are working. And so I think that is one of the greatest roadblocks to the second bill is simply we're adding more red tape. We're adding more government interference, government reaching in than I think we need to. And it's if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing.
And the numbers that they've looked at as far as, if there is some fraud, there's always some fraud in different programs that happen. You can't say that there isn't. It happens. But if you're going to spend millions of dollars looking for something that at a level might be $50,000, that's ridiculous. And that is a poor use of public funds. Knowing that it happens, doing the best you can in the system that's already there to try to find that stuff and to work on it, I'm all for it. But if you're going to basically take millions of dollars out of the program in order to actually look for something that might be $50,000 worth of an issue, is not a good use of our funds. And that is essentially the situation that comes up with this stuff. I mean, I understand some of it, but when you see what has happened in other states, that this did not make the program any better. And all it did was cost money. And it was money that got taken away from the folks that actually need this assistance and threw them off the program because we didn't have the funding for it. That's kind of where I fall on that. I mean, I understand it. It's logical to think we should go after people who are committing fraud or folks that shouldn't be on the program. But when you're going to essentially take resources away, in a significant number of resources away from people to try to do that, I don't think that's a good use of our
Well,
funds.
the current Medicaid expansion plan does that. Having worked at the Department of Revenue, did some investigation and made sure that there is an asset test. I don't think we called it an asset test, but some of the folks in the Department of Revenue that actually could have been filling these spots in the offices that we had to shut down found of the 96,000 Montanans who benefit from this health care, two possibly had assets exceeding what was allowed. So, those odds aren't good enough for me. Now you might say, well, we should make sure every single recipient gets that. Well, 2 out of 96,000, I don't think that's good government to be spending resources on that. And, I got to say, I don't know if you all take advantage of the state health care system, but we benefit from state health insurance as legislators. We also have an option to take a monthly allowance, and it's pretty generous, in excess of $1,000. So we enjoy this benefit. I'm tempted to say, well, make us work 80 hours a month and fill out all of this paperwork.
well, that would work during the session, but not during the interim.
Well,
I don't mean to
and we
make light of
did,
this.
we heard during the hearing from people who work seasonal. We heard from a ranch hand. She works, a lot of hours, that certainly she would meet the 80 hours a month requirement in House Bill 658, but then in the downtime, she wouldn't. So and 7 out of 10 people on the expanded Medicaid work. And the 3 out of 10 who don't, can't. They have
Yeah.
a disability or a mental health challenge. They are caregivers. So, and to me though, aside from all of this, the big just the problem with 658 is a non-severability clause. What that means is if one little piece of this 50-some section bill is ruled unconstitutional, or the federal government, CMS, says, no, we're not going to give you that waiver, it throws the baby out with the bathwater. All of Medicaid expansion is gone. So we, if anything, we need to replace that non-severability clause with a severability clause, because we can't take that risk.
Well, that's a very interesting detail, and it illustrates the importance of how bills are crafted. There's all kinds of ways to craft bills that can end up being enhancers or poison pills. Depends on your perspective and what turns out. I guess as a citizen, watching this and listening to it, not just you, but just in general, my sense is that Medicaid expansion has succeeded so much that neither party's willing to let go of it. I mean, and an outside study and now the fiscal note both point to 50,000 people losing their coverage, round number. You know, half the people who gained it are going to lose it under the conditions of this bill. Now, though, there's a contest about that. It's not agreed that that's actually the case, but that's what the numbers are showing. So for me, I keep wondering now aloud, is this really not about the technicalities and the money and the details? It's really about whether people believe that health care is a human right or not. You know, is it something you must earn and have what there's people like to say, skin in the game? You know, you have to deserve it. You have to put effort into it, or is it something that you get as a matter of right in our society? Now, I might be wrong about my portrayal of this philosophical divide, but that's what it feels like. Is that really, and it's a national debate about health care and how to finance it, and is it going to be government or not government? So, does anybody want to speak to that?
I want to say that the current iteration of Medicaid expansion does have skin in the game for people who can. They are required to actually make a monthly payment if they can. So folks who can already have skin in the game, and so they pay a monthly premium. It might be rather small depending on what their ability to pay is, but it's there already in the iteration that we have, and it is something unique. Other states that expanded Medicaid didn't have that in there. So now we want to go to the next step and actually make it worse on people. And that's my thing. It's a step too far as I'm concerned, because we have one that essentially incorporates those kinds of concerns already and should be continued, and just repeal the sunset and continue a great program that works fantastically.
Well, we have about 4 minutes left, and I would like to invite each of you to just speak briefly to anything else, like a particular bill, maybe not a major issue, but something you've been working on that you're proud of or worried about.
Breakfast bill.
Sure.
Yeah,
Since I had a
because
great
that's-
hearing in front of Mafia on Monday.
Well, I had some other people
yeah.
with me too.
Just a few people on the education committee, but I have a bill that incentivizes breakfast for school children. So we know that when kids eat breakfast in the morning, they pay more attention, they do better in school, they're focused. And so what this bill does is if schools increase the number of kids that serve breakfast for the free and reduced lunch program, they get a certain incentive, about, I think, 5 cents per student or per meal served over the course of the year. And so for Helena, I think it was expected that would be about $6,600 going back to the school. But the flip side of that is the more students we feed, the more federal funding we also get. And so what the governor's office just emailed me about this week was that if we put this program in place and it has the expected results, we'll receive an additional $745,000 in federal funds for student meals. And so this is a really good bill that comes with, it does have a $250,000 fiscal note, but we triple that with federal funding if it passes. And so it hasn't gone through executive yet, and I don't know when it will, but it's got at least some bipartisan support, and we'll see if it has enough.
And it addressed, it was wonderful, the people that came in support of it. They've done a great job. But things, because somebody said, well, aren't we complaining that kids are already too fat? Basically, it was, and this, a good healthy breakfast actually is one of the best things to reduce that sort of issue, because if you give them something healthy that stays with them rather than a sugary cereal that costs less, that reduces it and it stays with them longer. So there's all kinds of side effects, or that just go way out there. So it's a fabulous bill. I don't know how it's going to, but
Well,
it was.
It also lets our local schools redivert some of the general funding that they're spending on food for children. I know Jefferson diverts some of their money to food for kids to make sure that they're adequately fed so that they can, again, be focused and learn. And so this allows that money to go back to the school to spend on other things that they need the money for. And what Jefferson's seen with one of their innovative food projects is that the kids that receive the food share backpacks, prior to this Jefferson's program, those kids were eating those backpacks while at school instead of taking them home over the weekend, which is what they were meant for. And so with Principal Carter's program, that stopped happening. And so now they're not only being fed at school, but they also have that food for the weekend, which is what that food is meant for. And so
And she also has the snack program.
that is the snack program.
That is the snack, yeah.
But it's a really innovative program that Helena schools that's their version of it, but other Helena schools are implementing different unique versions of finding ways to get kids fed. And so this bill just makes sure everyone throughout the state can find ways to feed their kids and save money and make sure the kids are learning.
Well,
That's a happy note to end on.
Yes,
actually,
it is.
Julie Dooling represents the majority party, but at this table, she's very much in the minority. So I want to give her the opportunity to have the last word before we break.
I have a bill it's still in appropriations. It's House Bill 421. It's the shopping and disorderly conduct bill. A lot of the retailers, especially like the big box stores, people go in, they shoplift. If you're below the $1,500 threshold, they have take their shopping cart, go out the emergency door to a waiting getaway car, and if you catch them, because of the revisions in the law last session, all you can do is give them a ticket to appear in court. Well, these people are part of coordinated gangs that go from city to city along the interstate corridors, or even along the High Line, just major cities, and they go and they hit multiple stores in a day or in a week, and our stores are having losses from $10,000 to $20,000 per week. And so this bill will help address or set up the laws to say this is illegal, you can't do this. And then if they do end up getting caught and taken in, it gives the law enforcement a process in which to convict them. So we're hoping that goes through. Also attached to that is a disorderly conduct. Again, in the last session, they took away the jail time for disorderly conduct. And it's kind of tied local law enforcement's hands, where if they have a persistent person that starts the night out at one establishment or function and continues being disorderly throughout the night, they haven't been able to do anything. They just say, please go home. And that's all that they've been able to do. So now it gives the option of possibility of 1 day in jail, where they can say, okay, now, Bob, go home, sleep it off, or we'll put you in jail. And where they haven't had that since 2017. So hopefully this will go through, because the retailers really needed that portion of the bill, just because of the losses, to the big box stores and also the local boutiques, because it's not just happening at the Targets and Walmarts and things like that. It's happening to all the stores.
Well, I guess it's healthy to be reminded that even in our beautiful, wonderful state with wonderful people in it, we do have organized crime. This is a brand of organized crime that is new to me, but we hear every week, actually, at Hometown Helena, true stories about what's going on in our capital city, and it's a bit scary, and it sometimes does involve criminal gangs. But we're out of time. There will be one more episode of this program before the session's over. Thank you for coming back, and I hope you'll come again. And I think our viewers really appreciate hearing you speak your minds at some length. I enjoy hearing the conversation in this fashion. So thanks again.
Well, we enjoy it
you.
as well to
Thank you.
participate, be able to communicate to our viewers, so your
Okay. Well, thank you for watching Legislative Digest, the Capital City Edition. We'll be back one more time.